Hello, everyone. Welcome into today's webinar, Intro to AWS Cloud Practitioner, presented by our expert technical instructor at New Horizons, Dean Tilton. My name is Mariela Salinas, and I'll be assisting in moderating our session today. We are in Zoom for today's webinar, and we will be sharing a copy of this recording with you in an email after the session. We do encourage participation throughout the session, so please use the chat or that Q&A option for our short Q&A after the presentation. Educate 360 is so excited to present this webinar today. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Dean.
All right. Thank you, Mariella. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Again, my name is Dean Tilton. I'd like to take here the next roughly half hour to go over some of the items that are in the official AWS course. And to help out with that, I'm going to be sharing my screen. Now, you'll be seeing me look over to one side. I have two monitors. I have one monitor dedicated specifically for screen sharing. And I think this will help out as far as me going over the items and doing a few demonstrations to help illustrate the items that we'll be covering this afternoon. So with that, let me go ahead and share here my screen with you all. All right, there we go. So here are the topics for our Intro to AWS Cloud Practitioner, describing what they mean by the cloud and our cloud concepts, the advantages. Now, there are some disadvantages too. Of course, we'll emphasize the advantages, but I'll also point out here some concerns. The core services, a big part of what the AWS Cloud Practitioner addresses, are some of the core services. Now, there are lots and lots of services. We'll focus on some of the primary services, security basics, and the pricing model. And I've included here, this is basically a copy of what you would have in the official course, and I thought it might be of help since this webinar really addresses a kind of a summary, a synopsis of what's in that course. You can see here that after the overview, it provides an introduction to AWS, those various web services. And then it gets specific for working with computing in the cloud, a look at both the physical and logical infrastructure for hosting the various services, networking and storage services, databases and security, monitoring and pricing, and modernizing and when they say modernizing, they basically mean migrating up to the cloud, along with a topic related to the certification exam. There is a certification exam associated with this course. Now, to provide some of the basics, what do they mean by the cloud? So whenever you hear the term the cloud, what they're referring to are data centers. These are buildings that house racks and racks and racks of servers. For AWS, each contains between 50 to 80,000 servers that are providing these various services. And of course, we don't own those services, but rather we rent them. We pay a monthly fee for the services that we use. And the nice thing is you only pay for what you use. Now they provide here an analogy here. um, our customer and a barista offering a service, in this case, some beverage, fulfilling the customer's request that corresponds here, the customer to the client computer, let's say your Windows 10 system, and the barista to the server, fulfilling that request. And there's all kinds of different services that are available. Now, before I begin to point out those core services, let me describe some of the benefits of the cloud. Number one, we're basically replacing upfront capital expenditures, costs, and trading those out for your monthly variable operational expenditures. For most organizations, they can't afford to build a data center, but we can basically use AWS as kind of like our data center. We just pay them that monthly fee for the services that we use. Also, taking advantage of economy of scale, cheaper when done in bulk. In other words, scaling equals savings. As AWS builds more and more of these data centers, they benefit from lessons learned. They can take advantage of advances in technology to provide more compute capacity for less cost, and they can pass those cost savings on to you. Also, stop spending money running and maintaining your own data centers, if we could even afford that. The hardware eventually does need to get replaced, but if you're utilizing the cloud, that's taken care of for you. Other considerations, other benefits, stop guessing capacity. How many servers do I need to host our website? Are we prepared in case our site goes viral? Maybe you are. But what happens when your site no longer is so popular? You basically are underutilizing the capacity that you have. But in the cloud, you can dynamically scale to increase or decrease the amount of resources available for that increased or decreased workload. And again, you only pay for what you use. Increasing speed and agility. Historically, to provision a server, well, we got to get approval for that purchase order, place the order. When it arrives, maybe several days later, we might have to configure it, partition the drives, format the drives, install the operating system, configure the operating system, install and configure the applications, configure it for the network. I mean, there's a lot of steps that go into that. But in the cloud, we can spin up a virtual machine, what they call EC2 instances, in literally just a matter of minutes, and go global in minutes. Perhaps we're using AWS to host our web applications. When you do so, then they're globally available. AWS will act as a platform for your web developers to host those web applications. Now, not shown here, some concerns, and I totally understand why, is security. We're basically having to entrust our data to this third party. And can we do that? And I can't answer that question, but that's with any service provider. Um, and maybe there's some data, no, I can't. Some yes, some information yes, other information we're going to have to keep it on-prem or on-site. I would say that there's a kind of a slogan there is a slogan with AWS that security is job zero. That means security permeates and percolates throughout all that AWS does. And to be fair, most of the breaches are really due to the fault um, of the customer, the consumer. AWS has their responsibility. We have our responsibility. Now, they do provide guidance. In just a little bit, I'll show you where you can find that. Now, before I get into demonstrating some of these services, I wanted to show you something a little bit related to the architecture of AWS. And by the way, here, I'll just post it here in the chat window if you're interested. Scrolling down, they provide a nice little, by the way, they point out here that there are some 37 regions, and you can see those as black dots here on the east and west coast. But these data centers are organized into regions that span the globe. Typically, we would create the resources usually nearby at a data center in our region, typically. All right, so here I want to go ahead and also show, and let me bring this up here, some of the different services. Now, there are lots and lots of services. Some of them are considered as core services. For example, are offering compute capacity in the form of maybe a virtual machine, um, known as EC2 instances or Elastic Cloud Compute. These are virtual machines we can spin up and place inside of a virtual private cloud, a virtual network. Others include networking and content delivery. The networking would be those virtual private clouds with the various subnets to organize our EC2 instances. Offering storage capacity. This was actually their first service back in 2006, known as S3, the Simple Storage Service. And I would say for folks who are new to all of this, this is probably maybe the best one to start off with. It has a relatively low learning curve. It's relatively intuitive. Networking, there's a bit more involved, like subnetting, IP addressing, CIDR notation. Um, so there's a little bit of a learning curve when you're dealing with networking and EC2 instances. But storage, with the simple storage service, you can create what's known as a bucket and upload and download your files to and from. And pretty much everybody needs storage. In fact, actually, you could use this perhaps as an option for your backups. There's a general recommendation. It's called the 3-2-1 rule. Add that here. Now, it's not really a rule, more guidance. But you'd want to have 3 copies across 2 different media with at least 1 stored offsite. It's just a general guidance related to backup. So we could maybe use AWS's S3 for our storage for that backup. Maybe you're not in a position where you have this control at your organization. Well, maybe you can use it for personal reasons. You can create an AWS account and upload your files for backups to the cloud. Also support for databases, different kinds of databases, including relational databases, familiar databases like Oracle, SQL Server, as well as AWS's own homegrown Aurora, which is PostgreSQL and MySQL compatible. Here, others include security, like defining users, groups, and roles. Roles are basically a collection of permissions you can bind to a user, to a group, and as well as management and governance. Governance, kind of a fancy term for controlling who can do what. The organization has made a financial investment and they'd like a say in what is and what is not allowed. Governance typically implemented through policies. Now, to demonstrate these here, let me go ahead and pull up here. I'm logged in with my account. And up here, I have added these little shortcuts. It's really convenient here. Items that you frequently use. Um, let's say, for example, you wanted to work with SageMaker, which gives you the ability to, oops, sorry, looks like it's need a little bit of a refresh there. Been a little bit since I had accessed it. SageMaker is part of AWS's AI solution, artificial intelligence, basically technology mimicking human intelligence. And I want you to kind of keep your eye over here on the right-hand side. Notice when I click on the star, you can see, I don't know, it's a little hard to see there, it adds it. So if I'm frequently using this, I can conveniently pin it to my menu for easy access. or let's say my simple queuing service, whichever one I'm using. Now I'm going to go ahead and access here EC2, Elastic Cloud Compute. Elastic means it's dynamically scalable. You can create clones when the workload demand increases. You can decrease it when there's not that demand. And this will give us the ability to create and launch an instance, be it Linux, be it Windows, or some other operating system. We can define the amount of compute capacity. And of note here, notice there's one here called T2 Micro. When you sign up the first time for an account with AWS, you can utilize this instance type for free for 12 months. Gives you one virtual CPU, 1 gig of memory, just kind of play around with it a little bit. But there are others which far more capacity and far more cost as well. Like here's one with 64 virtual CPUs, 512 gigs of memory. Okay, quite a bit there. Others include a virtual private cloud for hosting those EC2 instances. The virtual private cloud is comprised of one or more subnets. We can specify where traffic would be redirected to through the routing tables. Grant access out to the internet through an internet gateway, and many other options. Here, S3, our simple storage service. This provides that storage in the form of what are called buckets. Let's see here, what do we have in this bucket? Okay, this is some files and folders. You can even use it to host static content, web content, by placing your web pages. Here's an example of a few HTML files or HTML files. Our databases with Aurora and our relational database services. And you can see the kinds of databases. Popular ones like I mentioned Microsoft SQL Server and Oracle, DB2, PostgreSQL. Also MariaDB and MySQL, named after the author's daughters. He actually has a son called Max, and there's one called MaxDB. It's not supported here, but and then Aurora. Again, those are databases designed by AWS specifically for the cloud. In fact, let me see if I can select this one here. And oh, they're not showing it here, but it offers increased performance. I think it's actually 5 times better performance in the cloud than a traditional MySQL database. And for security, our identity and access management, which many times we see abbreviated as IAM. Identity is basically who you say you are. Each user should have their own account, no sharing of accounts. That's for traceability. And we would organize those users into groups. So here's a list of a few accounts and some groups. And you end up binding those users and or groups to roles. One particular one to make note of here, actually you can see, so, oh, let's see, let me get a policy, is a policy associated with the role called administrator access. When you sign up for AWS, you're given a root account, which has carte blanche, full control. But you don't really use that account. Actually, what you use it for is to create an administrator. And then you pretty much, for the most part, forget about the root. And then with the administrator, you create other accounts. These are some of the best practices And speaking of that, so again, there, just a little demonstration there of some of the items. Um, Now, I kept this really simple here. There's a lot of items related to security, the principle of these privileges, defense in depth, a lot of features. Um, oh, a question there about managing a hierarchy. So you can use something called AWS organizations to do that. And with your AWS organizations, you can manage multiple accounts. And that will give you the ability to, and then as an extension to that, they have something called Control Tower, which gives you even further control. For example, maybe you're allowed or not allowed to use certain regions. Um, and so anyway, that's one option you have there with a hierarchy. When you're dealing with multiple, you only need one AWS account, but you can have multiple AWS accounts. I'm not talking about user accounts. I'm talking about an AWS account, not an AWS user account, but an AWS account. So again, organizations can provide that for you, and you can use security control policies or SCPs to filter in that hierarchy, filter down those restrictions or limitations to one or more AWS accounts. A lot of options there, sure. Now, what I just mentioned there might be like, what is he talking about? This is why I just wanted to include this one item here, the AWS Well-Architected Framework Tool. Security, there's a lot that's involved. What AWS did is they created what they call the Well-Architected Framework. And it now comprises originally it's four, now it's up to six pillars of proven principles, practices, and procedures. And I really appreciate this because it's like, let's say, hey, I'm new to, what's the best way for me to design a cloud solution? What should I include? What should I not include? Well, what AWS has done is they've embodied those best practices in what's called the AWS Well-Architected Framework. Now, it is a series of PDF files, but what they've done is they've made it much more approachable by creating what's called the AWS Well-Architected Tool. You'll notice it's the very first one I have. And with it, you can define a workload, or let's see here. Let me go ahead and refresh this. Um, Giving it a name, a description, and other information. And then once you fill that out, it'll ask you a series of questions. I think there's like 60 questions across those six pillars. So all you have to do is respond to those questions. For example, does each user have their own account? Does the root user have two accounts? I'm sorry, does the root user support multi-factor authentication? So you just check the boxes. Yeah, we're doing this. No, we're not doing that. Check the boxes. And at the very end, it'll make recommendations. Okay, based upon a well-architected framework, we recommend you do this, that, and the other. So instead of you having to read through, various pages of best practices across those six different pillars, you just answer the questions that apply to your organization, and then it'll give you a report saying this is what we recommend that you do. That's very nice. It's a very nice feature. And now, of course, you can also, download for free the documents as well. And then they wrap it up here with pricing. Now, the pricing here I specified for the EC2 instances, if you use those. Those are those virtual machines. Just want to point out a few features, and then that'll wrap us up here. But we'll give you an opportunity to ask some other questions. Um, the default is on demand. That's just where you pay for what you use, pay as you go. There are savings plans, both savings plans and reserve plans. They can give you substantial discounts, but, and it's not shown here, you prepay. With on demand, you pay each month. With savings plans and reserve plans, you pay upfront for either 1 year or 3 years. It's not 1 through 3. It's either you specify a 1 year contract or a 3 year contract. Now you're committing yourself. You're paying up front for that 1 year or those 3 years, but you can get substantial, dramatic savings. And then look at this one, spot instances up to 90%. Sign me up. Well, there's a catch. Um, Spot instances are a way for AWS to utilize unclaimed compute capacity. They've got extra memory, extra compute capacity, extra drive space that no one's using. So they decided, hey, why don't we give like a really good discount as an incentive for folks to use it? Now, here's the catch. Yes, you can get up to 90%, but AWS reserves the right to reclaim that for other paying customers. There's maybe like a 2 minute window of time before they take it. So it's like, oh, well, great. Well, some cases, let me give you a use case. A batch process, you start it and then maybe gets interrupted for a period of time, but then it can resume later. That could be an example for a spot instance. You can actually persist it using what are referred to as elastic block stores. It's like your hard drive or solid state drive. Save it there. Then when those resources become available again, you can pick up where you left off. And as I pointed out, there's that free tier. There's also another one that's just the opposite. It's the most expensive, a dedicated host. But in some cases, maybe for compliance or for a license to take advantage of certain licensing features, we may need to reserve a specific actual server, a physical server there at AWS to adhere to those compliance needs. All right, well, that'll wrap us up here. I just think, again, a brief overview. In fact, let me just even bring that back up here. These are the actual topics in the class. Um, the class itself, it is lecture only, but that means there's no actual labs. This is kind of like step one in your journey for learning about the cloud. Um, Here is my contact information. Let me go ahead and make that available here to you as well. So if you do have some other questions that you might think of, you're welcome to send those to me. If not, maybe you just open it up here for let me stop sharing that there. Open that up. Um, okay, a question there. Do you have a recommended follow-up webinar? Um, as far as a webinar, not that I'm aware, but maybe Marielle, you might know of one. I do know we have a follow-up class to this, but as far as a webinar, and Marielle, I might need to pass that on to you in case you happen to know. I kind of leave that on to you. But others are welcome to post questions as well.
Yeah, no, great question. Thank you so much for chiming in. I think we can definitely chat about what, step two would be webinar wise. So thank you so much for throwing that in the question and answering little option. I also went ahead and dropped a little link to learn a little bit more about AWS Cloud Practitioner Essentials. So thank you all so much for joining us today. I think it's well deserved another little look into the AWS cloud solutions that we can chat about. So TBD on that step two. But aside from that, I think that'll be it for us today. So thanks to everyone for joining us today. Thanks for those awesome questions. And thank you, Dean, for all your amazing insight as per usual.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Hope you have a nice afternoon. Take care.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us today. And we will hopefully see you all very soon in the classroom. Bye for now.